Matter of fact, some of you out in this audience saw me very emotional because my abuser is here today. With those words, Alexis Smith did what so many people, women, men, children that have suffered abuse and yet had to face a daring abuser down repeatedly, whether it was someone in their family or someone who just had the audacity to keep showing up, whether it was someone at their workplace or someone that they used to love. She did something so powerful, and it was a death knell, in a way, to call out an abuser to their face. She went on to win Miss Kansas 2024. But what she said, knocked down and opened the door in so many ways, so powerful, because she called out her abuser to his face. Greetings, guys. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Monette, and this is my channel, Evolve with Monette. For those of you that are new here, I am a professional intuitive empath. It is so good to share energy with you today. Come on in. Thank you for inviting me in. We have some things to talk about. The angels, apparently, have some things to say. It is early morning. Excuse me, just finished with my morning meditations, and this was the message that they have for you today. So this is for people that have maybe been in this space. Alexis Smith said that while she was literally on, I think, one of the devices thinks I'm talking to it. Alexis said that when, I said Alexis, Alexa, one of the devices in my home thinks. I'm not talking.
To answer your question, the HomePod is a series of smart speakers developed by Apple, designed to work with the Apple Music subscription service. The HomePod incorporates beamforming and 8 speakers and is sold in 2 colors, white and midnight.
All right, guys. So for any of you guys wondering about that, now you know. I won't say her name again because I'm going to trigger the devices in my home. All right. So maybe someone needs to know about a HomePod, or the message that I got specifically is that surveillance is probably happening regarding somebody maybe in your life that wasn't so kind or that was abusive to any degree, whatever that may be. Abusers have a way of not wanting to actually flee. When you have taken your power back, they actually become more obsessed. And it's this reflexive thing that happens in humanity. Nature abhors a vacuum. So when you pull your energy away, they will want to fill it with something, because you used to be fun to play with. You used to be someone that was present, that they could entertain themselves with, even if it was just to emotionally torture you, gang stalk you, depending on what they wanted to do. This beauty queen, whose name I will not say right now, says not to trigger anything, said that powerful message during a speech. She was literally doing her beauty pageant thing, and she talked about excuse me, her forum and her message being about ending domestic violence and or bringing awareness to domestic violence. And she looks out in the audience, voice starting to quiver. I will connect the link of her quick message below from a news clip. And she says, as a matter of fact, my abuser is here today. And to thunderous, rapturous applause, the audience supports her. The queens in the back that she's competing with support her, and she goes on to win the competition, which is just a chef's kiss. And I think it's so incredibly powerful to foretell what may be happening for some of you who've taken your power back from people that were getting away with murder with you or being abusive to you in any degree, especially those of you that have suffered domestic violence and abuse. Actually, with people that will not take no for an answer. You know, I grew up with a father who was incredibly abusive, and he would come and find us whenever my mother would flee. One of the very poignant memories that I had, which forever altered my brain chemistry. Now we see all the studies done, and everybody can watch a TikTok and see how when you start to yell in front of a child or you start to change the behavior, it actually changes the behavior of the child very quickly. Well, I remember a moment where I got my brain rewired by the abuse that was in front of me. I saw so much of it that I was anesthetized to it, as many of you guys can maybe understand how that goes, but my mother was trying to escape. My dad would do things, this is back in the 80s when phones plugged into walls, if you guys remember that, and he would rip the phone cords out of the walls before he would leave so she couldn't call anybody, and we lived out on Grassy Heap, which is an island in the Keys, and it was pretty remote. You know, the town that I grew up in is Marathon, which is about 15 miles further south, and at the time, back then, I mean, it was just so very, very remote. Now it's far more built up, but to be at my father's house and my mother's house, the house that they built together, meant that you were kind of out in the sticks at a time, and he knew that. So he would rip the phone cords out of the walls. He would do all kinds of other abusive things that all abusers do. Now it's cell phones that they might take from you, but it's a thing that abusers do. And so she somehow went to a neighbor's house and called a cab, because back then we did not have Ubers, we had cabs. And she called a cab, and I will never forget, it was this little VW Bug was the cab that they sent for us. And the person that they sent to to fetch us was a woman. She was a very, very petite woman. I will never ever forget. And she was approximately, gosh, maybe she was 5'1", 5'2", if she was anything. And I believe that my mother had mentioned to someone that she was going to go, meaning to one of the family members or to one of the other women that my father was feuding with. To some degree, I know that seems crazy, but in a strange way, there was a network of people, because he was he. Let's just say that. You know that song Papa Was a Rolling Stone, for sure. That was very applicable. But there was some family member or somebody, a woman, I think her name was Miss Margaret, who heard about it, and then my uncle came too. And they came because they knew that if my mother was trying to leave and my father got there and intercepted it, that he could potentially unalive everybody, because he had that in him. He had guns on the property, and he was not afraid to use them, and he was incredibly unhinged, to say the least, when it came down to those moments specifically. I'm right now channeling P. Diddy, and what just happened recently with Kim Porter, his girlfriend from Beyond the Grave, as Sloan Bella, who did predict that this would happen, said that she was writing a memoir, and an excerpt of the memoir was just released, I think yesterday or the day before. And he is talking to her afterwards, and she's detailing how he worked his way back into her life after he put her in the hospital, took 6 months, and then eventually worked his way back into her bed. That's the cycle of abuse. If you've ever seen the domestic violence abuse cycle up close, well, my mother was trying to get away, and as we were literally backing out of the driveway of our house, my father pulled up, and again, a few other people had gotten wind, and he reached through. I will never forget it. We were inside of the van, and I was in the very back, as any kid would want to be, of that very cute VW Bug. And I will never forget seeing his hand come through. He punched through the glass and tried to pull the driver, that very petite driver, out. And this was wild. He was absolutely unhinged. I want to frame this. We're back in the 80s, okay? And this one was Caucasian, and my father is obviously black. So even the optics for that, it was just incredibly brazen. But he didn't care, because when people are abusive and unhinged, they don't care about societal pressures, rules, or what should or shouldn't be, or what is allowed. He was absolutely unhinged. And my uncle, James, literally had to come and intercept him and talk him down off the ledge, gun in his hand, threats in his mouth. He did not want us to leave that house. We still managed to, and ran away for a while until he did what he did to come back and beguile and bring us back home again to begin the abusive cycle once more. If you've ever been in situations like that, I remember sitting there in the back and having my brain be rewired and thinking, oh, this is what love is supposed to be like. This is exciting. I'm a child. And I thought that was exciting. So for any of my survivors of any kind of domestic violence or seeing that growing up, you do have some CPTSD and you might need a little bit of therapy because you might have subconsciously found yourself in relationships that mimicked that level of chaos that a P. Diddy or someone like my father could dish out. When anything is too calm, and even if they're completely out of order, like for Kim Porter, in that moment, someone was courting her, not as a lover, but to potentially have a role in some film or something of that nature, and was really excited to work with her. And P. Diddy was dating a whole other set of people, as he was wont to do. But he was jealous because the producer sent over flowers and said, "Last night was amazing. I can't wait to work with you. I'm looking forward to this." And it wasn't romantic. But P. Diddy said to her as he is wiping her brow that he's pummeled in while she's in a hospital bed, "You know that I'm jealous." Even though he had his own relationship. Abusers don't play by rules and they don't respect boundaries. Okay? She talked about wanting to scream when she was in her hospital room, but what could she do? She had to pretend and go along to get along. And I know what that fear is like because I've seen it up close, not just in my mother's life, but in a relationship I manifested in my own life when I was older. The point of that is that the only way to take your power back is to take your power back, kids. And if you are placed in a specific point in life where you can say to someone who has not treated you right, "This is the truth of what you did," you still have to calibrate that and be careful, because there are people that are unhinged, like my father was and like P. Diddy is. If you've ever been physically abused, you know exactly what I'm saying. But if it's emotional abuse, then you get to acknowledge your pain. And if it's mental abuse, same. And if it's SA, same. So many of our family members and friends will be like, "Oh, was it really that bad?" and want us to suppress it and just go along to get along. But they don't know what havoc was wreaked in you. They don't know what triggers were set off in you. And they don't know how much of a setback it was to have to be around a person that repeatedly doesn't want to mind their P's and Q's and wants to overstep your boundaries. I love what Miss Kansas did because what she did was so incredibly brave. It is not easy to look your fear and your abuser in the face and say, "I see you." Now, she was on stage and he was in the audience and there were a lot of people, and if he would have rushed her or did anything to her, I imagine that there would have been a price to be paid immediately for him. But I still worried for her as I watched her do it, not because she shouldn't have. It was incredibly brave. She was mandated and dispatched. Sometimes we are sent into a moment where we are fulfilling our legacy, where we are meeting destiny. And that was a moment that will go down in history. It's probably the first time in pageant history, I don't know the stats, that anyone's ever done something like that, which brings a tear to my eye for her. It is so powerful. But I worry about, because I know what that looks like. She's safe now, and I pray she stays safe, but the abusers, when you call them out, become enraged. And he will have suffered a narcissistic wound because she called him out to his face, whilst and while on stage, and then went on to win first place. That's also a beautiful metaphor for what happens when you take your power back and you level up. You know, the kids are talking about aura points, but in the metaphysical community, we were talking about our aura forever and ever and ever. And so her aura was so bright, and she was literally a shining light. But the part of me that still does therapy was triggered because I know what the back end of that looks like when you say no, or when you try to push away and let go. And if they don't want to let you go, reactive abuse, not just reactive abuse, but abuse after someone leaves is what I was trying to speak about, is the most dangerous time. Okay? A lot of people become unalive, so please be careful. I don't know who I'm talking to today, tonight, 4 o'clock in the morning, whatever time it is. Please be careful when you do that, even if it's a narcissist that you're calling out that isn't physically abusive. Their only thing that they're going to focus and fixate on is how to get you back, sis. is how to have full karmic justice with you, because they think that you owe them something, even though they were out of pocket, they were egregious, they were dead wrong. You couldn't reason with my father in that moment. Literally, it was with brute strength of another man pulling him back that we were able to slowly back out of the driveway while that poor lady's having a panic attack. And I want to speak to that, not just the panic attack and the breach of boundaries. He didn't care who he hurt in that moment. He was enraged. He was in one of his blind furies and fugue states where he was unreasonable. But for the child, and for the child in you, but the child in me too, it sent a really powerful toxic message, is that this is what lovers and husbands and wives do. But I think we all know that's simply not the truth. It's simply not the truth. Guys, I want you to go through the annals of your mind, especially if you were in a relationship or you're out of a relationship or you're in hermit mode. You want nothing to do with it for whatever the reason. Maybe you escaped a narcissist. Maybe you escaped someone who is physically abusive or SA abusive or whatever it is. Maybe it's someone from your family that's intimidating and it's taboo, but it's a burden that's placed on you. I want you to understand that whatever stage you were at when you suffered that abuse, and especially if you saw that level of toxicity in your childhood, it will have informed the way that you think that you deserve to be treated and what you deem as good, bad, or evil. You will not see things the same way that other people do. When I tell stories about my life, some people can't believe that it's true, or especially because of the way that my life is currently. But that experience with my father very much informed my reality, even to present day. I had to unlearn and unindoctrinate those synapses that were fired, that were like, oh, this is what love is. It's exciting. This is what it is. You know, that movie Sleeping with the Enemy came out in the 80s as well. And I remember watching it, or 80s or 90s, and I remember watching it and feeling at home. That's sick, because that's what happens when you have been in an abusive situation since you were a kid. To you, it looks not toxic. I was like, oh, he just wants things a certain way. It reminded me so much of my father. The turning of the cans, the pristine. My father was a neat freak. Super, 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 super clean. And whomever was the girlfriend and the wife at the time, and he kept them in rotation and sometimes overlapping, not sometimes, very often, they had to be to that level of perfection. And there was physical hell to pay if the house wasn't kept in a certain pristine kind of way. It doesn't mean that... Oh, I just had a little flashback, y'all. Sorry. When I watched that movie, the beginning of it, when he's courting her, or when the marriage is shown as something good or something that she's interested in, before you start to see how Julia Roberts plays it so expertly, the fear and the jump scares that she has just because he's breathing or he's near, or she knows she's done something bad. You need to maybe address some things that have gone on regarding that, if that has been your reality. Because even if someone's coming in to love you, who is calm and not abusive and not crazy, you may have some leftover residue of the way that it used to be. I'm channeling the song, looking back over my yesterdays. I see reflections of you and me, reflections of the way life used to be. I'm channeling fragments and emotional shrapnel. They said you guys still have some emotional shrapnel embedded in you. And while calling out your abuser is the most incredible and brave thing I think anyone can do, you still have to have a plan of strategy to survive how you do that, because they become obsessed with you. the reason that that kept happening, even though my father had other people he was cheating with, other lovers, and other kids that are my age by a month or two. Okay, I have sisters and what do you call it, not stepsisters, but half sisters that are literally born within a month or so of me. And to my mother, he was married. So the audacity, right? For him to be abusive, to be anything. My mother never cheated, not one time. My point in saying this is their rationale, whomever the abuser is never anything that makes any sense. And if that informed, especially your childhood, you will manifest those kind of relationships to work through it. I want to talk about it from a metaphysical perspective. I don't know what Miss Kansas dealt with in her childhood. I don't know her history. I don't know when it was first imprinted on her. And for many people, they may not have come from that kind of childhood reality. Maybe they just got into a situation and they were dealing with a horrible place and person who was abusive. You know, we hear about the statistics of domestic abuse and how it can happen to anybody at any economic or socioeconomic bracket. It is not relegated for wealthy or poor or any ethnicity. You can find yourself in that, but especially for those of you that came from narcissistic abusive parents, whether they were physically abusive or emotionally, there are seeds that are planted in you that will grow later, and you probably got to see it if you're here on this channel, where you manifested and or seemed to attract someone who was always on the attack, whether it was insidious or not, whether it was to your face, whether it was physical, whether it was, again, any of the above. This is such an important message, is that you need to show that inner child love, because it may think, like I did, that's exciting. And then you find yourself with people that have these strange agendas or that are truth benders to the highest degree, or that are just outright abusive, actually. I reflected on my patterns of dating and friendships and how that went for me and how I could find myself in very interesting situations. So I stand up now. I am no Miss Kansas, but I stand up. And to my abusers, if someone is being abusive or disrespectful, it doesn't even have to be full out abuse, because I never let it get to that place. But if it's happening and it's starting to get slippery, I call them out completely, totally, and expeditiously. But that's me now. That's not me then. That's not the little kid that was in the back of that VW Vogue van watching my father's hand like the Hulk smash in and try to take someone out. That's me now. When people that are abusive to me in any capacity or degree try to silence me, which abusers will always do, and the way that people do it now is a lot more diplomatic, because I do stand up for myself, like I emotionally stand up for you. But they'll say, oh, Monette, your words, they're just so, harsh. Yes, but they don't know what I went through. They don't know why I developed the tongue that I have and the throat chakra that I do, to speak truth to power, or to call out something that's toxic and that's full of fuckery. It's because of that little kid that was sitting in the back of that van waiting to see if we were going to escape, if that lady was going to leave with both of her hands, if my dad was going to use a machete, like that. When you don't know what's next on the plan of attack for an abuser, and you finally find your power and your strength, and you can stand up for yourself, you will. I flee relationships to this day when people start to emotionally manipulate me to try to tell me that my words might be too harsh. That means that I am right on target. Your behavior is manipulative. You're trying to get away with some shit, and the little girl that survived it won't let it happen today. That's my way. I happen to have that habit of calling out abusers to their face, not just my own. I remember being in college, and I didn't know that I really had my gift. I was always doing readings. This is always part of my life, but I realized now what I was doing, and my angels were starting to let me know. And I was psychically starting to see things. And I remember there was a girl in my dorm, Nicole, and she was so beautiful. And she was dating a guy. Ironically, his name was Hezekiah, which is my father's middle name. And he actually kind of looked like my father. I think it was some soul work that was happening there, some metaphysical 360 that was happening. And he was abusive to her, and it triggered me. And I remember Nicole would come curl up on my bed and chat with me and be, we would just talk, and I try to give her advice, and she really loved him and all of that stuff. And you know how that goes when you're in an abusive, toxic cycle. And I would try to counsel her. Well, it the thing about getting involved, and that was a lesson that I learned, when you're dealing with people that are not ready to leave an abusive situation, and I don't blame them. Now I understand it. What will happen is, excuse me, is that they usually will go back. It takes a long time sometimes for people, repeated cycles, for someone to leave. Now, I watched it happen with my mother. She left that time and still came back with all of that drama, with him trying to attack the cab driver, with threats and guns and family intervention and girlfriend intervention. She still came back. It took some months, but she did. He came and found us in Miami, where she was working as a live-in maid, and brought her back home, only to pretty immediately punch her in her face. Not trying to trigger any of you, and I'm not trying to trigger me, but it's just when you understand and when you see abuse up close, he wanted to punish her. That's why I say you got to be careful when you're leaving these abusers, because if they can suck you back in, it's not because they want to love you again. It's because they want to finish the job that they started, and they want to punish you for your hubris and for your self-esteem. How dare you leave? How dare you tell them that they were mean or wrong or out of order? So be careful, guys. I don't care if it's physical or not. Understand that make a little makeup sex and a little block spin is not worth what might be the price of your life in some extreme cases. When I was counseling Nicole, she seemed strong. She seemed like she was ready to leave, but she wasn't really. And so what happened is I drew the ire and the anger of Hezekiah completely to me. And he started a smear campaign on the campus and was set out to find whatever he could on me, which was not much. I was pretty, straight-laced, straight-edged. And when that didn't work, it was just bullying from all of these big guys that were, on the football team or played basketball. And who the F did I think I was? He confronted me. That's maybe a cautionary tale for some of you guys that are getting involved with people that are in abusive relationships. You have to navigate that so carefully, because you may want to help. I certainly have. But if they're not ready to go, it will go bad for you. I remember having years later the same situation with a friend who was in an abusive situation, and her husband was kind of a kingpin and was a trap star and sold some illegal substances, and was pretty well known and a huge figure in the community. And we were dear friends, and I would be with her when he would cheat and never come home. And, I just loved her. Good friend, good Christian girl. She would iron his clothes so he could go out and cheat, because that was what she was indoctrinated into. That was the reality that her Christian parents told her to do. You don't leave. The Bible says you don't leave. That's why I say you might need to unlearn some of your indoctrination completely. In any case, I would be there with her because she hated being by herself, and it made her sad. And there were times when it got really bad. And one time she called and she said, "Can you come get me?" And I did. And another time she called her parents, and they did too. But what happened was we incurred the wrath from that man for having the bravery to do what we did do. And she went back because she wasn't ready to finally be through. She called me again in the future, and I had to weigh a choice. I had to advise her to either use her voice and to be sure, but I said I can't be involved this time because it can't be a gun at my head. And then you guys are having sexy time back in your bed before the sunrise. A lot of messages here today. Be careful when you escape. Be careful if you're helping someone escape. They have to be ready to do it. And you can't know that until they finally follow through with it. My mother did eventually leave. My father. She did divorce him. She did leave. She did branch out bravely on her own. And he made her life a living hell for years. Call her job and say that she was a thief because he hated that she had financial autonomy from him. Tried to get her fired. She never did, obviously. Her reputation spoke for herself. My mother was a police officer, ironically, in her country before she immigrated here. He tried to mess with her immigration papers. He tried to call ICE or immigration on her. He was ruthless. He would stalk us. He would come to the house where she was at. He tried to set our house on fire. Like, listen, y'all. You see what I'm saying? That's what happens when you leave someone who's abusive for years. Meanwhile, Papa was a Rolling Stone. Wherever he laid his hat was his home. He never, ever stopped having a rolling roster of women. Ever. But, for whatever reason, his clutches on my mother, he felt away. Maybe for him, she was the one who got away because she took her power back. She didn't stay. And she didn't play either. Sometimes she fought back too. But there was a cost. For us, for him, for her. When I saw Miss Kansas do that, tears welled up in my eyes. I began to cry because I know what it is to call out someone to their face. I know what it is to have people try to steal your voice because how dare you tell them that what they're doing isn't right. And I run for my life when someone tries to emotionally manipulate me into being quiet. Oh, Monette, like, is it really that serious? Well, yeah. Yes, it is. For that little girl that was in the back of that van who never forgets, any act of emotional violence or physical violence is a threat to my sanity. And if I'm going to call you out, that's my incarnation reality, y'all. Meaning, I don't think everyone should be Miss Kansas. I don't think everyone should do what I do. I think you should do what you are led to. But the primary aim that you might need to focus on is protecting you, but also never being afraid to stand up for yourself, even if it's not a direct confrontation, if that's not what you're guided to do, depending on the situation or who may be dangerous around you. But at least stand up for yourself and remove your energy. Do not allow them to pull you back in with their drama and their toxicity, because they will. And they do not want you to move on. And they do not want you to be happy. And they do not want you to have another relationship. They do not want, because they are now obsessed with you. And it's not even because they really love you. To people that have been abusive to me, sometimes I'm like, you don't even, this isn't even real. You don't even like me. You just don't like the idea that I see you and I've unmasked you. I might be one of the few people sometimes in people's lives that sees them actually right. Empath, a thing that happens for you guys too is once you unmask somebody, the rest of the world sees them the way you do too. Just like Miss Kansas on that stage, you better believe that when she said that, everyone had their neck on a swivel looking around to see who was she talking about. And that created for that man a narcissistic injury. I want to wrap her in a bubble to protect her from any retaliatory behavior from him, because I know what it looks like up close. I know what it looks like when a man can't hear no. I know what it looks like when a woman can't hear no. So I have run the gamut. I've had the experiences, but for those of you that have had them and maybe can share that energy of understanding that mutual, unfortunate, terrible club to be in, you know how powerful it is what Miss Kansas did. But you need to have your own strategies for if you're going to call out your abuser, you need to know how to run, or you need to be removed away where they cannot do anything to you. But understand karmically, there are things that are playing out because of the bravery in you. It means that everyone else around them will see it shift differently. It doesn't matter what smear campaign they do or how they try to obscure reality. Eventually, because of an unmasking, everyone will see, and that might be their worst nightmare. But you have to manage how you do that. The separate message here is if you had those emotional abusive relationships, you might want to think about how they might be affecting how you are relating to people as you are doing your adulting. It took me many years not to think that a high level of chaos meant that someone cared. Right? Even if it wasn't chaos I was creating, it was certainly chaos I may have fed into. Even if it was initiated by someone who was abusive, I was saying to myself, well, they must love me, right? No. They must want to own me. Sometimes they wanted to threaten my life, and sometimes they did, my very real life. You guys may have some real PTSD from things that happened at that time that you might have invited into your reality. And you think, Monette, I didn't invite anything. Energetically, those situations sometimes come in so that we can cleanse them and look at them in the face. And sometimes we're tested. Maybe it's not for you any physical abuse, but maybe it's emotional. And sometimes you'll be tested again and again with people that are maybe playing mind games or doing whatever. Every person that's ever been abusive to me has always questioned why on earth I would use all of my words with them. Well, for me, my words were my weapon. I was not physical. I actually hate fighting because of what I saw all my life when I was a kid. All my life I had to fight. And those fights included my dad sometimes too. Fights that I did not take to a grown-ass man. But I had to survive because it's what you figure out how to do. So physicality is not my portion, but with my words, yes, I am a wordsmith. And anybody who has ever been emotionally abusive or manipulative with me has always tried to politely convince me or outright threaten me to shut my fucking mouth. Because they knew that with my mouth, I would bring down whatever was their house of cards and insanity. You all have your own weapons. You decide what they are. You know, when you're doing a video game, they're like, choose your weapons. You decide how you want to fight. But most importantly, from first-hand experience, guys, protect your life first. Be smart about it. Over here on this side of the internet, I talk a lot about dark psychology. Not because I'm trying to teach you how to be manipulative, bad people, but I'm trying to teach you survival skills. Because an empath is not safe in a world full of toxic people, low vibe tribe, and narcissists. And they will try to convince you, and they will be brazen, and they will say, I deserve to be here. I can be right in your face. How dare you call me out? How dare you? But it's what you're supposed to do. For some of you, if you're guided to. I never want to put you in an uncomfortable position. I wish I could cuss out every one of your abusers for you. I wish you could send me all their numbers and I would do a prank call like the 80s, girl. I got you. But it's real serious. So clean up some of that childhood stuff. Because even though I do therapy and even though I manifested a relationship with someone who is not abusive to me, it doesn't mean that I didn't have other areas where that came in. I remember having a very toxic friend that I didn't know was crazy as shit many years ago. She was a full narcissist, I now know, and diagnosed actually, finally. And I remember her opining about my relationship with my husband at the time who I was dating. And she was like, gosh, your relationship is so boring. it's so boring. She was like you never talk about you guys fighting or whatever. And that doesn't mean that me and my husband always agree, but it wasn't to the heightened levels of toxicity that I saw her literally create. She would lie about her husband and try to get a case on him, and she would throw his clothes out in the middle of the night and light things on fire and call the cops for no reason. Like, she loved heightened crazy. Maybe it's something that she saw in her own childhood reality. When I was observing her, I was healing and I was starting therapy just about that time. I was working a job in corporate America. I had some good insurance, and I started seeing my first like therapist. This is when you still went physically before all of these talk therapists and stuff, which have their merit. Okay, guys, if you can find a good one. And that's another thing. With therapists, you need to shop a little bit. You don't always click in and connect with the first one. So don't be ashamed of that. It's like any good medicine. You got to figure out if it works with your system. But I was in that situation, and it's before I really began therapy. And I was, I lost my train of thought. Therapist, starting to identify triggers. Am I following it, guys? It'll come back to me. But in any case, you guys might need to get some therapy. Oh, that narcissist. She was trying to weirdly like goad me into disrupting my relationship because she couldn't relate to the calmness of it. And I was starting to heal because of therapy. Thank you, angels, for bringing me back. And I was like, she thinks that this is what relationships look like because for her, she's satisfied. She would tell me stories about wreaking havoc in teen boyfriends' parents' homes and just all kinds of stuff she would do. But that was always her way because she had her own mental illness to whatever degree. And if relationships didn't look like that in her adult reality, she made it look like that. And it flashed me back to my father saying to my mother, the neighbors say they don't hear us fight. And then that night he beat her within an inch of her life because he just decided that sometimes the neighbors, maybe they did say that, maybe they didn't. Narcissists are liars. So who knows what the truth is. But he decided, we're too quiet over here. So let's create havoc, death, and despair. That part. And it reminded me of that friend who I immediately separated myself from, quote unquote friend, because I thought she is sick and I don't want her ruining my relationship. And it doesn't matter if any relationship is perfect. No relationship is, neither is mine. But there was peace in mine. Okay? And there was a level of respect mutually. She could not relate to that. And I understood because I also remember that moment sitting in the back of that van where I thought, this is God's plan. This is love. So this is love. Da 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 da. Yeah, I thought, so this is love. Oh, this is what love is like? When you're terrified for your life, when you're scared, when you have goosebumps, when glass is crashing and fragments are spraying and people are screaming and everyone's pleading and it's heightened. It reminds me of the ride on Willy Wonka. That's what an abusive relationship is like. It starts off slow and it lulls you in and it's beautiful and beguiling and enchanting. And then as it's going faster, slower, whatever he talks about, it's the rower. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is a hurricane blowing? I don't know. Like, it becomes manic. That's what happens in abusive relationships. And by the end of it, everyone in that boat is like, make it stop. Willy Wonka, make it stop. And finally, it does. And that's exactly what happens. There's an abrupt pause in any abusive relationship where they're like, oh, I was just kidding. That wasn't it. And you're overreacting. And why are you going to talk about that? Or why are you going to speak about that? Like, that didn't even happen. You're making it way more than it was. No, you're probably telling exactly what the truth is. But you will become desensitized and think that that is what it's supposed to look like. So you have to stand up for yourself and realize what is wrong and what is right, and also have some grace and realize that you might have been informed at childhood to think that this is what it looks like when that's not at all what it looks like. But I'm proud of you because, like everyone over here, we're doing the work we need to do. And I want to empower you to speak up for yourself if it's safe to do. Remember that, if it's safe to do. Because I cannot come and protect you, but I can teach you and hopefully give you the skill set you need to take your power back, to journal about holding your abuser accountable, to making sure that you acknowledge that inner child that maybe could not stand up for themselves. What I'm channeling is an interview from a guy, soft white underbelly. I don't know if he was a cop or not, but he was abused. Oh no, the guy who abused him was a cop, and he SA'd him for a long time when he was a kid, and he lured him in with all the ways that groomers do. You guys know how that goes. And his dad and the guy were friends because this guy was like a cop and like a man about town. It was a small town. He took in a lot of boys for this reason. He was a PDF file, like, you know, that part. And the guy became an adult, and he saw him someplace. I don't remember the story fully. I will see if I can find his story and connect it below, because it's very powerful for any of you guys that have suffered SA. Maybe it could be triggering. I don't know. Be careful. Maybe watch that at your own risk, or at your own discretion. Excuse me, if it's going to be too triggering for you. But he ran into the guy and he ended up pummeling him. I believe did he murder? I think he unalived him. In a rage, in a fit of rage, because that inner child had not been addressed and had not healed and had not been looked at. And he was finally a man and he could take his power back. And he snapped. When he saw him, I think he was talking to his friends. He ended up stalking him, showing up at his house, and then went in and essentially, physically, not just like a pew-pew, I don't believe. I think he might have beat him to death. I don't know if I'm imagining that, but he physically unalived him, because of the rage and the suppressed energy from his childhood of not being able to take his power back. And that's why I want you guys to stick up for yourselves, speak up for yourselves, even if it's just in a journal, because that will come out of you. Whatever your level of abuse is, not to that degree, obviously, but whatever your level of abuse is, for whatever happens, when that happens to you, if you suppress it, that's what happens. It will be dealt with, because we're on this earth to deal with and heal all of these triggers. It sucks, right? It's uncomfortable. Why are we always in the state of always constantly cleaning? Well, that's the state that we're always in. Even our body is constantly regenerating itself, and so must our minds. But you need to take a look at what's inside, because any one of us there, but for the grace of God, we could be on that kind of demon time. Meaning, the demonic energy of someone who was abusive to us can linger in our spirit and can fester there. And then, let's say it's not about physically hurting someone or harming someone, but it's just about not letting someone else near. You guys get it? Like, let's say someone wants to come in and love you. The relationship that I had with my husband, I remember specifically when I was still spending time with that narcissistic friend, because energy transference is a thing. And my husband is very primal, and when I say primal, animalistic, he's like a Dr. Dolittle. He really communes with animals. That's his psychic gift, is that. And so he's very instinctive, okay? And I was learning him. And I remember I would spend the day with her and not think anything of it, but her energy was nasty, and we become like the people that we're around. I remember coming home, and maybe I said something flippant or rude to him. And he said, well, I don't know who, he just called me out. This is so not like my husband, because he's pretty calm with me, and God bless. He has to be, because I'm a whole lot, as you guys know. But he said to me, this is, again, when we were still in the dating stages, he said, I don't know who this is, but I know who you were around today. He called out her name. He said, you must have been with so-and-so, because I don't know who this is. And I was like, damn, cue Smokey from Friday, damn. He read me, y'all. Instinctively, primally, with his prefrontal cortex, he was uncomfortable with my energy, because it wasn't my energy. It was an energy transference, what they call them, narcissistic fleas. So be careful. That's another thing, guys. Be careful about who you're spending time around, because whatever thing that they are struggling with, whether it's a narcissistic flea, whether it's inauthenticity, whether it's duplicity, you name it, beans, greens, tomatoes, potatoes, it will get onto you. We become like the people we spend the most time around. And so that relationship, he never told me to cut her off. That's not my husband. He doesn't do that. And I wouldn't allow him to. I'm a girl's girl. But I had to figure that out in my own way and then get myself out of there. So, but it was such a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, he's absolutely right. Be careful the people that you are spending time around, especially because they will want to affect you. She did want to influence. She did want to disrupt my peaceful connection. It's too quiet over there. And that's when, remember what I always tell you guys, the faces change, but the behavior is the same. I saw and heard my father when she said that. She reminded me very much of my father. And I remember telling her that in my naivety. I didn't understand at the time. We were in our very young 20s. And I didn't understand, that you can't empower a narcissist with information because they're going to definitely try to flip it and manipulate it and whatever. And she would try to shame me for recall that was happening regarding my father. But it was because ding, 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 I was hitting the nail on the head. And another thing. Guys, your instincts are right. Empaths here listening, you guys are so bright. You're so smart. You're so perceptive. I need you to understand that your first mind about a person, a thing, or a situation need not be corrected. You were right. I cannot tell you the amount of time, specifically for the work that I do, it gives the narcissistic people, the toxic people, the low vibrational people, maybe the people that have gone rogue. Maybe they weren't always that way, but they got bit by some demon zombie. Now they hate me. Whatever is happening with those people in my life, it has never failed that each and every one of them has tried to tell me I wasn't right. They've tried to attack the very thing that I make my living with, the very thing that keeps me alive and help me escape situations that were toxic and potentially life-threatening for me. They try to alter my reality, which is the greatest offense to me. And for that, they can get this machete tongue. Absolutely. Forever and ever. In perpetuity. For eternity. Because the way that I feel about that, to be gaslit out of the reality that is facts, it's something where it makes me never look back, never want to go back. We're never going to talk about anything because now you are an archon and a demon, and you are someone that is out to get me when you try to have me be uncertain of my very reality. And then you want to tell me and try to coach me and beguile me into not speaking so that your fifis aren't hurt. I don't hurt your feelings. So I don't hurt their feelings because they love to hurt your feelings. But they don't want their feelings hurt. So, that part. Know your word. Know your worth. Stick up for yourself. Do a little self-examination about your triggers from childhood and the things that did not go good and what may have informed you that you could be in a relationship where someone could be a certain way to you. I promise you, a lot of you guys, you have ties to parents and family ties that informed the way that you later relationshiped in your life. It never fails. And that's not an accusation. It's just a healthy reveal so that you can really get to the crux of it. So you are not the guy on Soft White Underbelly, which is an interview channel by a guy named Mark, where he interviews all people from all walks of society. But you're not the guy who ended up in prison and had to really reconcile. Now he goes out and speaks, and now he does therapy, and he got his life together. But it took him a while because he had to face that demon that someone implanted in him essentially when he was a child. Took away his innocence and in its place put rage. And that was a bomb that detonated in that guy's face. And I have no pity, actually. Even the judge, I believe he said, was on his side. But, when you unalive someone, there are consequences in our society. So many people were supportive of him because for so many of us, that has been our reality. And so he was an anti-hero in so many ways, because how many of us have wished that we could be strong enough or big enough to take back our power and to look in the face of whatever abuser and say, not another minute and not another hour do you get to exist. For some of you guys, it's not that deep. Maybe it's just emotional manipulation, but that's still deep too. But I want to empower you to know that you deserve to take back your power too, in ways that are not of a vigilante. And for you, it could be as simple as opening your mouth, like Miss Kansas did, to speak and say, I know you're here in the room, and I know that you're watching me, but you don't ever get to do what you once did to me. I own my power now. And if I have to, and it's me and you, it's always going to be me. Choose you, empath, and set yourself free. So good sharing energy with you. Come back and join me next time, guys. We'll continue to evolve together.